Hey folks, welcome back. We're gonna go over 5 more real PMP exam questions, showing you the logic behind each question and answer so you're able to pass that PMP on the first try. Now remember, the best indicator for success on the PMP is how many exams or quizzes you write in advance. Getting yourself familiar with working your way through the logic is absolutely key to passing this thing. So grab yourself a pen and paper, make some notes as we go along. I'll throw up the questions on screen and I encourage you to pause, read through on independently and test yourself, and we can work together on the logic as we go. All right, let's get started. An Agile team is using Scrum methods. A previously unidentified risk has occurred and threatens the current release. What should the Scrum Master do? Stop work until the risk is assessed and analyzed, bring the issue up during the next stand-up meeting, engage the team to facilitate a workaround, or collaborate with stakeholders and the project team to develop a risk response. There can only be one right answer here, and it is C, engage the team to facilitate a workaround. So let's take a look at the logic as to why the other answers don't quite fit. Stop project work until the risk is assessed and analyzed. Well, we know that a previously unidentified risk has occurred, which means it's not a risk at all, it's an issue. Something that has occurred that we have not had a chance to analyze in advance or saw coming is something that needs our immediate attention now and is by definition an issue. So A is incorrect because we're not talking about risks anymore, we're actually talking about issues. The language in the question is trying to trip you up a little bit. So we're not talking about risks, therefore A is out. Also, you are not going to stop a project in its entirety until you've had time to analyze a risk on a project. Risk management happens all the time throughout the life of a project. So simply just putting on the brakes until your team has a chance to take a look at it is not going to cut it. So A is out. Bring the issue up during the next stand-up meeting. This isn't a very proactive approach, probably not the most appropriate thing to do here. You don't know when the next stand-up is. Presumably it's the next day if we're following Agile processes, but it could be a little longer than that depending upon how you guys are implementing Agile. It's a bit more passive. Bringing the issue up is not really getting ahead of things. So this is not the best approach. Collaborating with stakeholders in the project team to develop a risk response. Now this is absolutely correct if it's an identified risk. If the risk has not occurred, absolutely, if you identify a risk in advance, you will take some time with the stakeholders and the project team to understand what's at stake and what are our possible risk responses. But this is not a risk anymore. This is an issue because it has actually occurred. Therefore, engaging the team to facilitate a workaround is the only logical option. Because it's an issue, we now have to come up with some kind of a solution immediately. Therefore, the only correct option is engaging the team to facilitate a workaround. A project team is reviewing a budget early in a project and is surprised at the great cost variances. At the next retrospective, the team focuses on the budget problem and determines the current funding will be insufficient because all vendors have significantly increased their prices. Kind of reflective of today's market and projects. What should the project team do next? Activate and spend the contingency amount in the overall budget, approach management for the release of management reserves, determine estimate at completion or EAC and seek approval, issue a new request for proposal or RFP that includes a cost limitation. Correct answer here, folks, is C, determine estimate at completion and EAC or EAC and seek approval. This one is the most correct given the options because of kind of how broad it is, but let's take a look at why. Contingency amounts in an overall budget. So the project team can only access contingent reserves if a previously identified risk has occurred or has been triggered. So we allocate money based on things that we've identified in the planning phases and call that contingency reserve. You could have absolutely planned for vendor price increases when you're planning out your project and notionally set aside 10% of the budget, for example, and kept that locked away effectively until vendors increase their budget. But we don't know that we actually had previously identified this as a risk. Therefore, we don't know if we can actually access the contingency amount. It's possible this just happened and we didn't plan for it at all. So A is possible, but given the context of the question, we don't have enough information to say that. Approach management for the release of management reserves. Management reserves are very similar. They're money that's set aside by the management team of a company that is based upon the overall risk associated with the project that money is available only for management to use when they see fit. So the project team could perhaps ask or influence that, but ultimately it's the management of the organization that could determine whether or not to use management reserves. We don't know here if there is a management reserve. We don't know here if there is appropriate funding allocated to vendor price increases in the management reserve. So this is potentially correct, but we don't have enough information here. Issue a new request for proposal that includes cost limitations. So that would be potentially something that would have a big ripple impact for the company's reputation in the marketplace. Because we know that we're early in the project and we've done a retrospective, it kind of seems like we might have some work underway currently, which means we likely have contracts in place with vendors. If we were to basically rip up contracts and issue a new RFP, that could have a really bad reputational risk for a company in the vendor community. Folks might not want to work with you if you are changing contracts mid-flight and including cost limitations as well. So kind of a risky thing to do, would not recommend it. So the option that is the best given what you've got is determine the EAC, or how much is this project going to cost at completion. So it's a pretty good indicator of where the project will land, and seeking approval. Seeking approval is very broadly defined in this option. It could be approval for the contingent amount or contingency reserve, it could be approval for management reserves, it could be approval to continue the project or shut it down. We don't know. But because of how general this is, it is the best option given all options in front of you. A large utility company is using a hybrid approach to update their customer service software. The project has entered the testing phase and the project team has identified several defects in the system. An expert joins the project to troubleshoot the defects. An investigation finds that incomplete requirements gathering and poor communication between project team members and stakeholders have caused the defects. What should this project team record as lessons learned from this situation? Ensure all requirements are gathered before the beginning of the project. Assign a dedicated team for requirements gathering. It will help ensure requirements are complete. Regular communication with stakeholders throughout the project ensures that requirements and scope are valid, and hold stakeholders accountable for incomplete requirements. Correct answer here is C, regular communications with stakeholders. So the logic behind the other options, requiring all requirements to be gathered at the beginning of the project, is out because of the approach that the project team is using. They're using a hybrid approach, which is a blend of predictive and iterative project management, which would indicate there is some flexibility or ambiguity in the requirements themselves. If we gathered all the requirements at the beginning of the project here, we wouldn't use hybrid. We'd likely go with a predictive approach. So this one is likely out because of the logic. Assigning a dedicated team for requirements gathering, that would definitely help things, but there is also poor communication between the project team members and stakeholders as well. So it's not just about gathering the requirements, it's also about that back and forth. So this one is a likely good approach, but doesn't fully answer the question. Holding stakeholders accountable for incomplete requirements. If you were to do this, you would run the risk of alienation of your stakeholders not wanting to participate with you as well. A lot of times requirements do get missed, but we cannot name and shame or play the blame game with stakeholders or anyone truly if this were to occur. You run the risk of damaging some relationships. So regular comms throughout the project ensures that scope is valid. Because we're using a hybrid approach, we do need to have some regular communications. Good communications with stakeholders is key to any project success, and that would help ensure that the requirements are complete, documented, and the scope itself is valid. So C is the most fulsome answer here. An Agile coach is facilitating a discussion about servant leadership in a retrospective. During the session, the team members ask many questions. Which of these questions will the Agile coach answer with yes? Kind of a unique question here as well. Should servant leaders prioritize strategic thinking instead of daily work? Can anyone be a servant leader? Are there fixed guidelines for being a servant leader? And will my performance as a servant leader be assessed? Correct answer here is B. Can anyone be a servant leader? The Agile coach would likely answer, or would answer, yes to this. So why not the others? Should servant leaders prioritize strategic thinking over daily work? No, that doesn't get any work done. It's all well and good to think strategically, but if we're looking at thinking strategically in isolation of actually doing anything, that's probably not the most pragmatic approach. Are there fixed guidelines for being a servant leader? No, there is no right or wrong way to be a servant leader. Servant leaders, broadly, their leadership style is trying to understand those that they're working with, trying to understand the barriers or obstacles that they could be facing, and try to remove those barriers as best as they can. So they're very much kind of shoulder to shoulder in the trenches with folks, trying to be an enabler of your team's success. There's no guidelines of how to do that. It's really heavily reliant on solid emotional intelligence. So that one's out as well. Will my performance as a servant leader be assessed? Your performance as a leader may be assessed, but servant leadership, that's a style of leadership. Your ability to be a servant leader within that box is not something an organization would assess you on. They would assess you on your leadership skills or your skills or your performance as an employee, but not on your performance as a servant leader, full stop. So the most realistic or most correct answer here is, can anyone be a servant leader? Absolutely. In an Agile project team, leadership is often diffused amongst a group. If there is something very, very technical or a technical sprint going on, perhaps the person with the most technical experience steps into a leadership role and might need to employ some servant leadership. Anyone on that team can become a leader, and everyone on that team should aim to be a servant leader. So therefore, anyone can be a servant leader. Leadership isn't necessarily something that is given to you with authority in your title. Anyone in an organization can step up and help be a leader. A large construction project to renovate a landmark building in a highly populated area has received significant media attention due to its potential impact on the local community. Several stakeholders, including community leaders, local politicians, and environmental groups, have expressed concerns about the project's potential impact. Which approach should the project manager take to complete the project successfully? Focus on meeting the project goals with the highest quality standards so stakeholders will be reassured. Develop a stakeholder engagement plan and communicate regularly with stakeholders. Follow stakeholders' social media and attend all their meetings. Be respectful and empathetic and use active listening. Or track stakeholder concerns, but address them only when they become an obstacle to the project's progress. There can be only one correct answer here, and that would be B, develop a stakeholder engagement plan and communicate regularly with stakeholders. Let's start off with A as to why that doesn't quite fit the bill. If we were to focus on meeting the project goals to the highest standards, there's no guarantee that stakeholders will actually have their concerns assured. That's simply pushing the project forward or steamrolling your stakeholders a little bit and making the assumption that they don't know what they need, which is not a great approach in project management. So A would be out. Following stakeholders' social media and attending all their meetings, this is all well and good, but you are likely to be in a heck of a lot of meetings. Not necessarily a great use of the time of the project manager, and being respectful and empathetic and active listening, these are all great soft skills, but there's no guarantee that this approach will actually help you land the project successfully. Following social media doesn't move the needle forward, it just keeps you informed as to what they're up to. Probably a good approach to understand, how they're communicating about your project, but it's not the best solution. Tracking concerns, but addressing them only when they're an obstacle to you. This is like performative stakeholder management. This is actually how you'd create a larger riff in a stakeholder community or stakeholder groups, where you do town halls or track their concerns, but do nothing only when they become a problem for you. People will be really upset if you started to use this approach, because they will realize very, very quickly that you're not actually doing anything. You're listening, you're perhaps even wasting their time. But folks would be very upset when they realize that you're only dealing with their problems or their concerns when it's a problem for you. So a stakeholder engagement plan and regular communications is the most fulsome option. The stakeholder engagement plan would likely include things like following people on social media, attending some meetings, of course being respectful and empathetic, and how you're going to go about addressing concerns. So B is the most fulsome option of the four. Hopefully you scored 5 out of 5 on this and are ready to write and pass the PMP exam on the first try. Let me know in the comments what your score on this was, and let me know if any of these questions tripped you up. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more PMP question explanations and walkthroughs to help you pass that exam. Thanks so much for watching, folks. We'll see you soon.